Welcome to the Catalyst of Change Advancing Equity and Inclusion in Science. This seminar is in English. There is interpretation available in Spanish, French, and Hindi. To access interpretation, kindly select the language of your preference in the Zoom bar menu. This seminar will be recorded and made available on the CIMIT YouTube channel. We will be having an open Q&A session at the end of the conversation, and you are also invited to submit questions via Slido for our distinguished speaker of today. We will be hearing today from Dr. Pajau Vangay, Senior Director of the Scientific Network at the Hypothesis Fund. And she supports and empowers a diverse network of scientists in identifying and pursuing high-risk, high-rewards projects. Pajau Vangay was once a CIMIT intern. Pajau Vangay will have a conversation with Dr. Silvanus Odio, post-harvest specialist and the Agricultural Technology Innovation Lead for CIMIT in Latin America. He coordinates a network of research platforms and experiments focused on agribusiness innovation for last-mile service providers, food processing, and agrobiodiversity conservation through community seed banks. He was named among the World Food Prize Foundation's 2024 Top Agri-Food Pioneers for his contributions to reducing food loss. Silvanus is from Benin and studied agronomy at the University of Abonai, Calabi in Benin. He holds a PhD in agricultural science and biological engineering from the University of Liège, Belgium. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Brian Govers, Director General of CIMIT, to officially open the event and introduce our distinguished speaker of today, Pajau Vangay. Dr. Govers, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Once again, welcome to Catalyst of Change, Advancing Equity and Inclusion in Science. This webinar series is to showcase leaders and leadership styles that are advancing equity and inclusion in their organizations and communities. In this series, we highlight the diverse range of leaders, change makers, and allies of women in the underrepresented geographies and ethnicities, differently abled people, indigenous communities, and other often unheard voices in agricultural science and development. Equity and inclusion in leadership is essential to build effective, ethical, and future-ready organizations. And that's exactly what we want CIMIT to be. By highlighting diverse leaders who put equity and inclusion at the center of their leadership, we aim to provide role models and to improve our own institutional leadership. Because you can't be what you can see. And one of our values is leading by example and learning by doing. So in this series, we want to learn by doing, and we want to learn from those that lead by example. And therefore, we bring people with different experiences and worldviews into our conversation. This brings forward better and innovative solutions, greater ability to advance risks and unintended consequences, and better representation of stakeholder needs. We talk with leaders at the community level and at the international level. And today, therefore, we have a true catalyst of change. Pajau Vangay, and I hope I pronounced this very correctly, Senior Director of the Scientific Network at the Hypothesis Fund. And today, therefore, we talk to a true catalyst of change. Pajau Vangay, Senior Director of Scientific Networks at Hypothesis Fund, received her PhD in computational biology from the University of Minnesota. Her graduate research focused on impact of migration on the human gut microbiome and obesity development in refugee communities in the US. She also has a master's degree in food microbiology from Cornell University and a bachelor's in computer sciences from the Colorado School of Mines. After completing her PhD, she joined the California Council on Science and Technology, and she got a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship as a policy committee consultant and a legislative aide in the California legislature. Okay. After completing her PhD, she joined the California Council on Science and Technology through a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship program as a policy committee consultant and legislative aide in the California legislature. Prior to her current role at the Hypothesis Front, she was based at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, where she was the scientific community manager for the National Microbiome Data Collaborative and partnered with scientific communities to champion open science and data stewardships. As senior director of the Scientific Network and at the Hypothesis Front, she supports and empowers our diverse network of scientists in identifying and pursuing high-risk, high-reward projects. Now, without further ado, please welcome a true catalyst of change, Pajau Vangay, in a conversation with one of our true stars.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks everybody for inviting me today. Maybe I should just say, I know my name is very difficult to pronounce, and so it's Pajau Vangay for anyone who's wondering. Thanks so much to the organizers for inviting me today, and I'm really excited to share my career journey. That was a wonderful introduction that previews what I'll be talking about today, and I'm excited to take your questions at the end as well. So you'll see throughout the slides here that there is a general theme of partnership with communities throughout all of the work I've done in my career. And I truly am, a staunch supporter of equity and inclusion in science. So maybe I'll start at the very beginning here. So here's a picture of me and my older sister in traditional Hmong clothes. I'm from an ethnic group that's a minority in all parts of Asia, in China, as well as Southeast Asia. And my family is part of the hundreds of thousands of Hmong who became refugees after the Vietnam War. My parents ended up in France. That's where I was born. And eventually we made our way here to the United States, in California and in Colorado. As mentioned, I did my undergrad in computer science and took a job in California as a software engineer for a couple of years. Funny thing was that I worked as an engineer during the day and then took additional classes at the city college. It's sort of like a community college at night to learn organic chemistry and biochemistry, classes I never took as a computer science undergrad. That's really where I sparked my interest in the life sciences. And around the same time, this will age me a little bit, but this was when quite a few articles came out about my community that was still in Laos. Many of the remnants of our people who were fleeing the war didn't fully escape. And it just affected me so much that I knew that I needed to do something different with my career. I could have led a cushy job and stayed in the software industry and continued on with that line of work, but I knew that I needed to join the sciences to do something to help the broader community, especially globally. And I knew that a lot of that was either in the health or agricultural sciences. And so, and I love this statement here because I can continue to further my education and my success, but it's really for me to lift others in the community, especially those underrepresented, as I continue to climb. So I entered a master's program at Cornell, and you'll notice a familiar face here. Jenny Nelson Gray was a pivotal part of my experience there. She managed a class and taught a class and was actually responsible for many of my international experiences during that time. And so I did do a 1-month internship at CIMMYT there in Mexico City. It was wonderful. I was also able to visit Kenya to do a little bit of product development with a cheese company. And then I spent 6 months in a really rural part of Thailand, working on teaching students a bit about microbiology. But the funny thing is, I was out there in the world looking for ways to make an impact. And I realized there's so much more that I could still do at home. So after all of that, I came back to the US. And I was searching for where was the highest concentration of my community. And that was actually in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. I haven't actually grew up with a large Hmong community. I grew up mostly in Denver, and so this was new for me. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I knew I wanted to work with my community, so I started a PhD program there with a phenomenal advisor. And I was really lucky to meet Kathy Colhane-Para, she's pictured on the right here. She's a medical director at a local clinic. And she also leads an organization called Solamo, focused on inclusion of communities in conducting research. She's also an expert in community-based participatory action research, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But it was really through meeting her, learning about her organization, that significantly impacted the research that I would lead. So if you're not aware and you haven't heard of CBPR, this is a technique actually used in a lot of a lot of social science actually, but I think we're one of the few first to apply it to sort of a bench science research project. And so essentially you're partnering with the community to conduct your research, but you're doing it from the very beginning. A lot of research, as you all here know, sometimes helicopter science kind of goes in and just takes what they need, right, and leaves. And so this kind of turns it upside down and includes the community from the beginning during development of the problem, designing and implementing it throughout the process, as well as a really important part is the dissemination and outreach at the end, where you're sharing the results back with the community. And so early discussions with the local communities. Also, Minnesota happens to be the highest number of refugees per capita. And so we had a couple of conversations with a variety of communities there. Based on interest, we ended up working with my community, the Hmong community, as well as the Karen community. Now, I should note both of these communities are from Southeast Asia, but from slightly different regions. Many of the Hmong that we're working with came from Laos. They ended up in Thailand in refugee camps, and then eventually made their way to the US. This is about the 1970s to 1980s timeframe. The Karen ethnic group came from Myanmar, also ended up in refugee camps in Thailand, and then they ended up in the US maybe around the 2000s. And so just keep that in mind as I talk a bit about my research later. But you can imagine they're following sort of the same migration paths to get to the US. So from the science perspective, we know that the gut microbiome, so these are the community of microbes in and on our body, that's really has been shown to be really important for health. We know that it's shaped by our environment. So this is the diet you eat, the water you're drinking, just your surroundings are shaping the tiny microbes in your gut. Naturally, it would make sense that people from very different countries are going to have very different gut microbiomes. We also know in the US that as people move to the US, their health deteriorates, unfortunately. They start inheriting many of the chronic diseases that we also have here, including obesity, diabetes, what have you. And we also know that the gut microbiome is really important for the development of the immune system from the minute you're born. It's shaping it, it's priming your immune system to be able to tell between friend and foe. So for knowing all of this, scientifically, we've always been curious about, how does the gut microbiome change as people move to the US, and how does it contribute to the potential development of these chronic diseases? Now, the community perspective is a little different. They also are aware that they're getting sicker, they're gaining more weight as they move here. This is anecdotal, evidence that they've been sharing with us, and we can clearly see it in the community as well. But one would think that, oh, they're just eating American burgers and American fries. Maybe that's what's happening. But that's not what the community is telling us. They're saying we're not doing that. We're still eating much of our traditional foods. And so with that in mind, we actually partnered together to define this problem and look into this. The community was very open to this idea of a gut microbiome. Obviously, that's a new concept for them, but they were open and interested in learning more about it and potentially whether it contributed to the chronic diseases. We wrote our grant proposals together, and then when we got funding, we developed an MOU, and it was truly a partnership between the academic side and the community side of the project. So a quick introduction to our team. Kathy, who I already mentioned, as well as members from her organization, are our community-based participatory action research experts. We also hired a group of community researchers from both the Hmong and Karen communities to help us with recruitment and really be our boots on the ground, talking with the community and getting them to work with us. And then our academic researchers, my advisor, myself, and a med student were really hands-on with this project. We also recruited a community advisory board from each community. And so we had a Karen at-large members of the community who we would consult with at all stages of the project and review documents with. Now, I'm plopping my photo here on the community researcher side because being from the Hmong community, I was also on the ground running around recruiting. And so I think it's really important that I happen to be a member of this community. So I was straddling both the academic and the community side. And it was quite easy to always keep the community in mind as an academic researcher. So our study designed, we worked with folks who were born in Asia, but moved to the US. That was kind of our primary group of people we're interested in working with. And so these are Hmong and Karen. And I should mention here that this was actually meant to be just a very small pilot study. I think our numbers were only maybe trying to recruit 50 people, but it ended up snowballing and being so successful that we recruited over 500 people. So it was really great. We also went to Thailand and worked with communities back there to get a sense of what folks, their gut microbiomes might look like beforehand, before moving to the US. And then we also worked with a group of what we're calling second generation Hmong. So they're people who were born here in the US, but their parents were born in Asia. You'll notice that we don't have Karen in this group because they haven't been in the US long enough. And then we also had a small group of controls as well. Now, for every single person, we collected their migration history, what they ate, their dietary recall, took their measurements, as well as collected a stool sample. I won't go into detail about the data, as well as the methods about how we turn a stool sample into microbiome data, but I will tell you that it is very small, non-invasive, and really straightforward to collect. And we put it in a sequencer, read out all of the DNA sequences in there, and then do a bunch of analysis to understand who's there and what they might be doing. In terms of recruitment in Minnesota, this actually took about a year, a little bit over a year. This was very grassroots. I did not have connections to multi-clinics. It wasn't one of those like those large grant projects or anything like that. This is really me running around and calling all of these centers to see if they would let me stop by and put a table out or just have a conversation with their folks. And I will have to say that while we did go to all of these locations, probably the best and most successful way of recruitment was through word of mouth. Being from the Hmong community doesn't mean that a Hmong person's going to trust me right away. There's definitely, you could imagine with these refugee communities, there's a lot of trust issues. We also saw slightly different versions of some of those challenges between the two communities. The Karen were interesting because what was interesting with their refugee camp in Thailand was that there was a malaria research unit there. So many Karen were already familiar with research and therefore had really positive experiences with it. So when we met them, they were actually very open to participating in our research study. We also had an excellent community researcher here. He's in blue here on the left, Hui Pa. He's so well connected in the community and was able to, really ramp up recruitment really well there. For the Hmong community, it definitely was a little harder. My community has been in the US for, it's actually technically 50 years now, but at the time of the study, is a little bit shorter than that. And did not have the best relations with research studies in the past. Apparently, there had been research done and they just never heard back. And so there was, some trust issues there. But also, coming out of the Vietnam War, the secret war in Laos, there were definitely issues with trusting authority and trying to get a sense of, what are you going to do with my data as well as my stool sample. And so even though I was a Hmong researcher, I still had to have a lot of conversations with folks. Sometimes it's more about identifying how you're related. So they know that they know who your parents are or your grandparents are. And then eventually that makes it a little bit easier. But also this word of mouth where I put a star by, once people learn about, oh, my cousin or my friend also participated, then they're like, oh, okay, well, then I think I trust you and that's fine. So it really actually just took off and was a snowball type of event, if I can use that word. So I also went back to Thailand. So this is after that 6 months that I spent there, but in a different region now. And so about an hour west of Chiang Mai city, I went to a Hmong village there and worked with community researchers there to collect stool samples from a pretty remote community. You'll see from the photos there. The Hmong refugee camps have since closed since the 80s, so there's no way that I could get representative samples there. So that was probably the best replacement for that. Mela refugee camp was the largest Karen refugee camp at the time, and we were very lucky to have connected with some folks there who allowed us access to the camp. So I was able to also work with these Karen community researchers to collect samples as well. And so just a quick reminder of what our study design looks like, and I'm just going to circle our dietary recall. So you might wonder, how are we collecting this data? So we actually, our community researchers sit down with every single person we work with and basically conduct an interview. Like, what did you eat? How much did you eat? We have these little food models that we show them, and they can describe it. And because the community researcher knows the cultural foods, they're able to translate to us what it might be, right? And so we take all of that handwritten data, bring it back to the lab, and enter it into a USDA kind of software program where it breaks down the macronutrients and micronutrients. Now, you might imagine, how do we do this with very cultural foods? The USDA is actually not very good at being representative of a variety of non-American foods. And so we created this tool, we called it a food tree. So you can think of this sort of as a phylogeny. The foods within this USDA database are categorized with codes that hierarchically classified them already. So using those codes, we were able to conduct this tree, as you can see here. So, all the vegetables are together, and similar vegetables are grouped together. While it's not perfect, it allowed us to put things like this fern that I took of at the camp. Don't know what it is exactly, but we can make a guess as to where it is in the tree. And I wanted to share that, over 200 foods were not in the USDA database. We had to actually supplement from other databases. So all of their nutrients, we had to manually curate that. And over 70 foods were not in any database that we could find. We had to actually manually research it separately and look up their closest relative if we couldn't find them directly, and just kind of a breakdown of their nutrients. And then we would enter it into the tree. So that allowed us to have a really complete view of their diet. You could imagine this is about 300 different foods that could have been completely missing from their diets had we not manually curated it in. And this is important because diet is a critical part of shaping the gut microbiome, and it was something that we looked really closely at. And so I wanted to just spend a second here to talk about these phases of implementation where we were doing recruitment and collecting samples. We were continuously getting feedback from the community as we were doing it, as well as our advisory boards. And I wanted to point out that it was truly this partnership with the community that ensured our success. the Hmong community actually shared very early on that many of the newcomers coming from Laos in recent years happen to just be women, and so shared that it would be really difficult to recruit men for that reason. And so we ended up modifying our study to focus on women only, actually. And then we also got feedback from the community about we initially had planned to have a probiotic intervention. There's a lot of pushback on that. People didn't really want to do that and want to consume anything. And so we shifted that study design and moved that component over to some mouse work that we followed up with later. Also, our IRB review board probably hate us. Like the committee probably hated us because I was continuously sending edits to our protocol. As we would go and recruit, we would learn that our participants wanted us to recruit a different way. So, for example, they asked, can you come to my home because I can't drive? So then we had to modify the protocol and get approval to do home visits. Similarly, many community members wanted to do consent as a group with their family, with their husband. And so we again had to modify the protocol, wait for approval, and then do it. And so it definitely took longer, but was so critical to ensuring the success because we did it in a way that the community wanted, but also in a way that allowed us to recruit more people. And so I really credit a lot of that to this partnership. So I'm not going into too much detail about the scientific findings, but I'll briefly share here that what we found was that I guess, this Bacteroides is a type of bacteria that is very commonly found in industrialized populations. We end up finding that eventually takes over this other Prevotella bacteria, which is very commonly found in non-industrialized populations. Eventually takes over within a decade. Prevotella is also a really great fiber fermenter, meaning that our folks in Asia are eating a lot of different vegetables, and so there's going to be a lot of Prevotella. Once they move to the US, that kind of diminishes. We're also seeing that gut diversity is lost with time in the US. So diversity, you could think about this in the ecology sense. Think of a lush, diverse rainforest forest versus a monocrop cornfield. The lush rainforest is going to have a lot more resilience to things coming in and destroying it, and can be able to bounce back. So the same thing applies with the gut microbiome as well. Gut diversity is typically associated with better health, and so we start to see this stark decrease in diversity as people move to the US. And last thing, the diet did matter a lot. We started to see massive changes in how people ate over a long period of time, but it didn't explain all of the variation we're seeing in the microbiome, which leads us to suspect that there are other changes and other factors that are entering in and changing it. You can imagine your water source, even your food source, even if you're eating, you may be eating the same foods, but it's grown differently. Maybe they're using more pesticides here. And so all of that matters, but we weren't able to capture any of that in our first study of this kind. And the last thing I wanted to point out was that gut microbiome changes a lot faster than the diet. Again, corroborating what the community told us from the beginning, that they weren't changing their diets right away. And so the fact that we were seeing changes in the gut before the diet changed is telling us that there are all these other factors that are coming into play. And so my colleagues over at the University of Minnesota are continuing to look into this. We followed up with an animal experiment. They are continuing to do mouse experiments there where they're looking at things such as additives and artificial sweeteners, as well as all of these processed foods types of additives. And happy to share that paper just got accepted yesterday. So hopefully will be coming out very soon. And the last phase, this dissemination phase, which actually means, the sharing of results, it's really important to me because we can publish our papers in journals, high profile journals, but if it never gets back to the community, then what's the point? And so we invested a lot of our time doing this. With the Karen community, we had to use slightly different strategies for each community. And so for the Karen community, we hosted a series of classes focused on nutrition, cooking. You can imagine, many of these people are coming to the US, coming from, refugee camps where there's not really, no running water, right? And so navigating grocery stores, your own kitchen, reading nutrition labels, that's very overwhelming. And so instead of bombarding them with gut microbiome data that they're not going to understand, we integrated it into some nutrition health education, was able to talk about our study when they talked about the importance of fiber in your diet. And so that was really, really great. With the Hmong community, we had to use a slightly different approach. Remember, the Hmong have been here much longer. And so we engaged with a local organization called the Hmong American Farmers Association, because we, as an ethnic group, have a long history of farming. And I also partnered with a local chef, Chef Yia, who happens to he's a celebrity chef now, but back then he wasn't. But I was able to partner with him to host a number of workshops focused on traditional fermented foods that our culture makes. And so this picture here is a fermented mustard green that is delicious, but many of us younger folks don't know how to make it. And I was able to talk about the role of the microbes, and then also insert results of the study to share that as well. There was so much success that the local paper happened to cover it. So it was really great. And lastly, we also put together an animated video in all 3 languages. And this was in partnership with a local art student as well as the med student. And we also distributed not just on YouTube, but we sent DVDs to everyone who wanted them, and also did more presentations throughout the community to share the results, because sometimes, just reading the results doesn't quite get the message across. Sometimes visually seeing it makes more sense. Now, beyond dissemination, we published the scientific results in this high-profile journal, which was fantastic. Further proof that working with communities can result in better science. We also published the community methods in a community methods type of journal, and we spent a ton of time doing outreach with the community. But I still felt like it wasn't enough, and I really wanted to understand how we can further the impact of new scientific knowledge. And so that's really where I left Minnesota and came to California to join a science policy fellowship. And so it was here where we spent a month of training about the legislature, and then spent a whole year in the legislature with this policy process, learning how bills become law. I was really proud to get to work with the only scientist in the legislature. He happened to be a physicist, Dr. Quirk, and he was very supportive of me managing and supporting this probiotics labeling law through the bill. It didn't become law, unfortunately. It died in the Appropriations Committee, but that was great to get to see the merging of policy and science there. I'll be honest that it was a fantastic experience, but I really missed being a little bit closer to the science. And so that's when I joined Berkeley Lab, where I was hired as a community manager to work on with our broader communities on open science. And so I'll just run through this really quickly. I know I'm taking a lot of time. As you all know, we're generating so much data that we don't have the infrastructure for it. Also, if you have ever tried to reuse data or get data from another PI, you know that it's messy and it's hard to sort out. And so the goal of the National Microbiome Data Collaborative was to turn this messy stuff on the right-hand side into something much more organized like this. And it's really about standardization of data. Now, a huge component of that is actually getting people to do it, right? To change, not just build the infrastructure, but getting people to culturally change about prioritizing that. And so I led an effort to create the first program where we worked with early career researchers across the US and empowered them to conduct workshops to teach their fellow community about open science, about data standards, and how they can actually go about doing that. We reached so many microbiome scientists who weren't even aware that metadata standards existed. We reached over 1,000 people. And for me, this part was really important. It was the main reason I joined the project to begin with, was that, maybe making the data more accessible is really about democratizing data and making that available to not just other researchers, but eventually the public as well. After that, I'm just going to tell you really quickly, in my current role, I am currently based at the Hypothesis Fund. And the Hypothesis Fund is a new organization started about 3 years ago. And really, the mission is to focus on how science funding is kind of broken. The reality is, at least in the United States, much of the scientific funding comes from the government, but it is very conservative. So oftentimes people write proposals for things they've pretty much already proven that they can do, and then they can get funding for it. And it's really difficult to get the large grants. And so our organization is coming in to tackle this in giving small seed grants for really high risk basic science. And so essentially allowing them to get the preliminary data that they need so that they could go and get the larger grants. It's really hard for folks to scratch that itch and go after the really risky, bold ideas when they don't have funding for it. And so this was a news article that was released at the time that the organization was started. These were what we're calling our scientist scouts. And so we use this model that is a bit borrowed from, if you're familiar with the venture capitalist world, where they employ scouts to go out and look for companies to invest in. We actually kind of riff off that model and partner with a group of scientist scouts, very established scientists, their own disciplines, and they help us identify projects and people to fund. These individuals are, this is the 17 that started. We're now over 30 scouts, and within 3 years, we've given out over 60 grants, seed grants, and we're starting to see the impact of those grants now, where many of our awardees have gone on to get follow-on funding. They're producing wonderful papers, and I'm really proud of the diversity we see across the disciplines, across the US. We've funded over 40 institutions, and I think one of the most rewarding parts of this particular role is actually getting to create the connections with the community. So I think what we're doing is so much more than just the funding. The funding, of course, is important, but nothing beats having a really respectable scientist come to you and say, hey, I think you should go after this idea, and here's some funding for it. And so we have heard directly from our awardees how much that's done for them in their career, just having another supporter, another champion in the community. But further, there have been just wonderful things that have emerged from getting to create all of these connections with these amazing humans, friendships, collaborations, what have you. I continue to learn about how they all support each other, and so to me, it gives me a lot of hope about the future of science if we can continue to create this culture of support within our community. Hopefully, we can expand that to the broader community. So I know I'm much over time, and I will stop here. This is all I have for today, but this is my email in case folks want to follow up with me, and I'll stop sharing.
Hi, Pajau. Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. My name is Silvanus, and I am an agricultural scientist working at CIMMET. And I am committed to advancing equity and inclusion in our work in line with CIMMET and CGIAR value. And when we work on topic like this, we all carry blind spots, and I mean area where we don't always see or identify. But that can have a huge impact. And I will never have imagined that migration pattern will influence the composition of the good microbiome. So your work is very innovative and very inspiring. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. So I had the opportunity to interact with you according to that topic. And I would like to start by asking, how did you first come up with this idea? Maybe I missed it during your presentation. But I would like to know how you get that hint, and what way did and how your cultural background shape the way that you approach this research topic and your vision now as a leader?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking that. So this process was actually a little bit organic. As I mentioned, I moved to Minnesota specifically to work with my community, and I wasn't sure how I was going to make that happen. But I joined a gut microbiome research lab, and so at the time there had been a couple of prominent research papers focused on seeing that people in very, very different countries have very different gut microbiomes. No one had ever looked at the influence of migration, even though we suspected that things were changing. It would make sense for your guts to start changing, but the reality is that that's very hard to do scientifically. You could imagine that people are moving all the time, and how do you control for where they're moving from, when they're moving, and all of that? And so it was really through these conversations with our communities around the area that not only were they very interested in the high rates of chronic diseases in their community, which has already been linked to the gut microbiome, but their migration past the fact that everybody was basically moving around the same time and from the same place allowed us to do this beautifully designed scientific study where we didn't have to control so much because it was already controlled by design. I think culturally, being from the Hmong community, it was honestly just easier for me to always have the community in mind. I didn't have to force it. I think even in our conversations as we're developing, a lot of the protocols together, I always had in mind, okay, well, what would the elders think? Should we get their input? And that doesn't mean I'm an expert representative of the community. Definitely not. I'm seen as, younger. And so we did have to hire a community researcher who was from the elders, who helped us with that as well, because there's a different way you talk to elders, right? And so, definitely there was a lot of that. And I think that that definitely, really just this mantra of lifting as you climb, to me, I feel like the knowledge, especially about the gut microbiome at the time, was sort of considered as like a hot topic in science, right? And I felt like only the really educated people had access to this information to start to pay attention to their gut. And again, it's about democratizing science. To me, it was important, like, hey, I'm going to do this research study with these communities, but I want to make sure they know they have this knowledge so that they start paying attention to it too.
Thank you very much. Maybe out of curiosity, do you speak, and pardon my ignorance, do you speak Hmong language?
I do speak it, yeah, and that was really critical for the recruitment too. I'm not perfect in it, but I definitely can speak it conversationally. Yeah.
Okay, and is there a word for good microgram in the Hmong language?
Yeah, that's the hard part. The science, the language evolved so long ago that we don't have words for a lot of these newer modern words. But the best way, so there's a word for infectious small animal. And so I flip that and I say good small animal. So usually when people say that they get sick because of an infection, it's usually they call the infection like gamo, which means like a small animal that causes harm. And so I flip that around and I say good bug. And so I call it gajong. And so we're able to talk about it in those ways. And honestly, analogies help a lot, metaphors help a lot in terms of explaining a lot of the science. And so the recruitment process does kind of turn into a little bit of education and informing the public about just this topic in general before we even get into, do you want to participate?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I understand, and we're seeing that your work also involve engaging with vulnerable communities. And we also at Summit, we deal a lot with that, particularly in area, where we have fragile conditions. We have a project, for example, in Sudan, where we're trying to push for food security. And so you mentioned a lot of time that building trust is very essential when we are leading this kind of work. So what have you found to be the most effective way of creating trust and ensuring that people feel respected and represented throughout the whole research process, apart from, of course, the language part?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And whatever I do share, it is pretty specific to the community too. So I think it's going to be there's no silver bullet. It's going to be have to tailored. So as I mentioned with the Karen community, we were very lucky in that they were already uh, exposed to research, and so for that reason, they were like, "Oh, research." Great, we'll participate. And they were very open to learning about the gut microbiome and just getting started right away. My own community, given our history, it definitely took some time. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of events that happen even within the community that, being from the community doesn't necessarily give you trust right away. And so a lot of times it was really just going out there, working with community researchers who people knew. So they were strategically hired because they were already working in the community. They were very passionate about health in the community already, so they had those trust relationships to start with. Of course, there are many people we didn't know in terms of that we were trying to reach, and so a lot of times it comes from referrals. And so people that worked with us for the study, they would, hey, recommend a friend or a cousin. Why don't you go ahead and talk to them? And so the referrals worked really well because the trust was already established with someone that they knew, and they were much more open having that conversation. I'll tell you what didn't work well was all the times that I set up a table at public locations. So in the Twin Cities, there we have these Hmong markets. Some of them are indoors. They're very popular, and so the community goes there all the time. And so I set up a table there multiple times, and always try to talk to people, and people just did not want to talk to me. And it's because you're talking to strangers with no connection. You're not in a private space where you can really explain, and that just did not work well. So it was really the referrals that helped a lot, and then for reaching the slightly older age group, definitely our community researcher who was a little bit older as well, that made a huge difference, because I think there's slight variations with even trust among age groups, right? And so there's a certain way that we have to speak to elders when it comes to that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for highlighting the need to always connect with local people and local partners that are in the region where we want to do the intervention. I catch through your presentation that you have a computer science background, and actually also a food microbiologist. I think I'm a food scientist, and
Oh,
generally we
that's
don't
great.
have yes, but we don't have a computer science degree. We did have some classes on computer science, but it's very basic. And I'm assuming that these have a lot of impact on your on the way that you approach uh, the problem. And right now it's very important to adopt a transdisciplinary approach because the challenge that we are facing, systemic challenge, and we require that kind of approach actually to make that happen. And then I have a question because I am assuming again that this has an impact on how you drive that research. And you mentioned a lot of time, data, and the fact that democratizing data. And we are seeing that that data and AI are shaped by those with more resources and influence, and sometimes leaning toward the political right in terms of answer or who benefit. So, based on your experience, what are effective ways to democratize access to data and AI tool? And I'm putting that question in the context of the global South, where CIMIT work is much more established, where we also want to promote equity and enable historically underrepresented community to participate and benefit from research. So it's yeah.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, but I'll do my best to answer it. No, it's great. Yeah. You know, it's funny. It's having the computer science background, I always thought it was a setback because I was basically changing careers. And I thought, oh, I wasted that time. I could have just started with biology. But of course, as you all know, the world changed and actually really valued those computational skills. So I was honestly very lucky that at Cornell, I worked with Dr. Weidman, Martin Weidman, who, he does a lot of food safety work there. And so he saw that the world was changing and he hired me as a master's student specifically because of the computational skills. I would tell you that I did not get that same treatment across a lot of different programs. People thought I was crazy for wanting to switch careers like that. And then ever since then, it's just been this explosion of data, right? As you mentioned. And so it continues to shape how I think about all of the work I do. Even today, I still analyze even our data at the organization in a certain way and structure it. And it allows me to really be mindful. I think a lot of what we do as scientists is visualize data and think about creative ways to communicate that data. I use that a lot in my current role today as well. In terms of democratization, there was a really beautiful study that came out maybe just a month or two ago, actually even talking about the lack of data sets from the human gut microbiome field in the global south. Like there just isn't enough representation. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, people just honestly taking the easy way out, working with communities that are easy to access. And unfortunately, needing to establish collaborators outside of the US in order to do that. I'm proud to say that our data set that we generated does represent minority, like very few microbiome data sets from Thailand. And so I'm really proud to say that we were able to contribute to some of that. But I think it takes time and it definitely requires collaborating with various institutions. There are great institutions all over that are ready to partner together. I think that sometimes people just don't know who to do it with. But I am aware of several nonprofit organizations that are starting this effort of, what do you call it? Sort of like biobanking for the agricultural sciences. They're starting to do that for the gut microbiome as well, because there's this theory that we're losing our ancestral microbes due to industrialization. And so in antibiotics and all of that. And so there are several organizations that are partnering with organizations all over the world to try to create that resource. And so I think something like that is fantastic. But I do think that the work I did at the National Microbiome Data Collaborative of standardization and open science, that's critical. I met so many people from in Mexico, actually, Global South, Puerto Rico, as well as in Africa, who are using some of the data sets that we generated to teach, because you don't need to do an entire experiment or study to be able to teach your students how to analyze microbiome data. And so by directly accessing that data, that's a huge part of that. So I hope that helped answer the question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, it's very important to highlight collaboration with different kind of partner. And unfortunately, time is running. I would like to finish with a tough question. I mean, I find your profile very interesting because you also have to engage with you engage a lot with policymaker. And I want to ask you a question related to the current global situation. We all see today that gender in science is becoming increasingly politicized, and this sometimes create tension between scientific communities and the wider public and policymakers. And so from your perspective, what strategy do we need to implement to bridge this gap so that equity and inclusion remain at the center of both scientific and decision making?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I should clarify that I'm no longer in a policy role, but I'm happy to still address that. And maybe I might even change the question a little bit to be broader than just gender. So, here in the US, I think science itself is being politicized, which is just heartbreaking, to be honest, and really terrible. And so I think, so I might address it from that perspective, if that's okay. And I think as scientists, there's a lot that we can do. I talked a lot about the outreach and the dissemination that we did. That is not normal, as you all know. That is not normal as part of scientific research. But I think we need to do more of that. It's not simply just publishing your papers and moving on. And I don't fault scientists for that. The incentive structures are set up that, everyone is so busy. They have to get the grants, they have to publish in order to secure tenure. So it's the system is not set up for them to do these things that they should be doing. So I think systemically, from a broader perspective, science as a whole needs to shift the incentive structure to not only prioritize data sharing and open science and make that a priority, but then to also encourage more of the public facing work that needs to be done. And I think that's what actually, unfortunately, is driving a lot of this wedge between science and the public, which is so unfortunate. But we need to put ourselves out there. And it's hard. It's not easy to talk about your science in a way that makes sense to everyone, but you have to start somewhere. Many colleagues that I know are starting to do that. And several organizations are kind of helping with that. But I think there has always been this perspective of scientists being in the ivory tower, right? And not really engaging with the public. And that's why I think it is so important. We don't hold all of the knowledge. We're not better than, we need to share the knowledge that we have so people could be more informed.
Yeah, thank you very much for this nice conclusion and the fact that we need to engage more with the public. I don't know if you have a question in Slido. I think I'll let to Isabel and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Silvanus, for having this great conversation with Pijao. And yeah, we receive a lot of questions, but I think our time is almost gone. So, Pijao, what words of wisdom could you share with the audience as our takeaway?
I guess my biggest words of wisdom is that, I think I spent my entire career searching for this way to make impact. And I was sort of running away from skills I already had, ready to make change, and then always entering areas that I knew nothing about. So it was very humbling. But I think looking back, the fact that I was able to do it, it made me a bit more, just more confident and able to do it over and over again. And I have found ways to merge all of these passions and interests. So I guess the biggest words of wisdom is that there are ways that you can find intersections for the things you care about. The world continues to change at such a rapid rate. So we have no idea what jobs are going to exist in the next 5 to 10 years, what fields are going to get created. You can be a part of that. And so I would say that keep that in mind. And if there's something that, even a hobby or something you're really fascinated about, there's a way to integrate that into the work that you do.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much for this very interesting area of research, very, very innovative, I think, for our own awareness. And I think still we need to learn a lot to be healthy. So on behalf of Dr. Bran Govers, Director General of CIMIT, we thank Pijao Vangay so much for sharing with us your outstanding professional and personal journey. Also, we appreciate Silvanus Odio for having a great and interesting conversation with you. Thank you both for being catalyst of change. So we thank and invite the audience to join the following Catalyst of Change Advancing Equity and Inclusion in Science seminar series in 2 weeks. Have a great day and a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.